This is a message of thanks and gratitude to all you amazing Reluctant Preppers who are making Reluctant Preppers possible by supporting our mission on Patreon. With your help, we're overcoming a 75% drop in YouTube earnings because you're not standing still, but are doing something about it and taking action by going to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledging to keep us on the air. Now our team is 42 patrons strong and growing, and when we reach 100 patrons, we'll start sending out tokens of gratitude as a handwritten note from your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, and an autograph signed on a U.S. Silver Eagle to one of our patrons selected at random each and every month. If you haven't yet taken the step of joining in to support Reluctant Preppers, it's so easy. Just go to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledge any amount you can. You guys are awesome, and we can do this together with your help at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. Did you know you can buy silver at spot price? Get your 10-ounce bar of silver at spot price today. Go to sdbullion.com/rp. Not only will you be buying silver without any premium, you'll also be supporting the independent media. Reluctant Preppers gets a small commission when you take advantage of this special offer, going to sdbullion.com/rp. That's sdbullion.com/rp.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We are quite honored to have a returning guest tonight, Beau, Doboszenski, the Director of Training at Sealed Mindset, which is a tactical and self-defense and preparedness and leadership training institute headquartered in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, is here with us once again on Reluctant Preppers. He's going to talk to us about changing signs of the times and what we can do about it to draw forth from within ourselves and from expert help, unchanging advice that we can call upon as we live in changing times to maintain the safety and health of ourselves and our family. Beau, thank you so much for joining us once again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
We were delighted about 2 years ago when we had your co-founder, Lieutenant Larry Yatch, on our program to talk to us about some of the skills that are taught at Sealed Mindset and some of the attitudinal principles. And then you came on more recently than that to talk to us about sort of a series of gates that we should prepare in our mind to go through, steps of safety that we should build when facing uncertain situations, to basically to create safety without necessarily launching into escalation and confrontation as our first options. You mentioned things like there's more to it than just the actual original conflict. There's all of protecting yourself against litigation and other threats to your life and livelihood that could come, and your liberty that could come from later on if you didn't handle the situation appropriately, and giving us lots of pointers along that road. So for those who are listening and have not yet heard Beau Doboszenski's earlier interview, please, we'll include a link to it in the notes to this video, but please go back and watch it. It's a great source of information on that. At the end of that, you shared with me a sample set of your DVDs that you provide for in-home study for people who want to learn about concealed carry, about self-defense, about defusing risky situations in public. And if we could just spend a few minutes talking about sort of some personal reflections that we had in watching that, and then what you may have heard from other people who have you've shared that course material with. For ourselves, my wife and myself watched some of the videos about basically lowering your risk and raising your awareness and lowering your risk in certain public settings, and changing the situation to make sure that you're maximizing the chances of getting the help that you need, and minimizing the chances of becoming a victim, minimizing the chances that it's going to escalate. And it was interesting that even though we've been to like concealed carry class, and even though we've got our permits, and even though we've done lots of preparedness steps for years now, there was still a kind of emotional tension and reluctance to even, it's funny, Reluctant Preppers is the name of our website, to even watching the videos. Like we had an option of, okay, we could pull out a comedy, or we could watch this thing that's going to be about real potentially stressful situations, real danger, that kind of thing. And there was a genuine barrier of reluctance, and we realized how it was just one insight that we didn't know about ourselves, is how much we tend to avoid thinking about and avoid contemplating difficult conflict situations. So could you talk to us about other perspectives that have been shared by people who've been exposed to that educational information that you guys offer?
Oh, very much. That's a very common thing that we've heard from people. It's there's two types of people that tend to watch training videos. One tends to watch because they want it for entertainment. The other one actually wants to develop skills from it. And some it's
because their husband said they had to.
Yeah, that too, which is, I always appreciate all of the reluctant spouses and partners that have sat through my DVDs. The part that has, I think, real value for a lot of people is that the way that we approach training is we're very, very low ego. So we're not yelling at you. We're not working to be intimidating in any way. And we recognize that's the fact because most people, when they go into training, it's an extremely stressful situation, right? You're on a noisy range, or, here's this really, if you will, braggadocious instructor that's standing in front of you that was a SEAL or Ranger or whatever he is. And a lot of people find themselves to feel really intimidated, and they have a hard time sort of taking those first few steps. And as people start to go through training, especially with us, one of the things that ends up, people have a struggle when they go to start training with somebody, they have a struggle with changing anything that they have done or learned in the past. We as human beings become very invested in things that we believe will save our lives. And the gigantic issue with that is if we, as preppers for sure, are under 100% assumption that everything I've done is going to work in 100% fashion, we're probably going to be wrong. And so having this ability to be flexible, to be able to walk in and say, okay, what don't I know yet? What haven't I learned enough about? I know for one of our students that had come in, he'd been through multiple different types of training courses, some of those fly out ones where you go and spend 3 or 4 or 5 days out there. And when he got started with us, he was looking at this as going, okay, well, I've done all this. What can you do that's possibly different? And what he found is that we're incredibly different. The level of detail, the focus in on getting the fundamentals exactly right. No, it's not good enough that you can put the hole in the paper. You have to do it correctly, and you have to do it potentially under stress. And then that ability for him to be flexible and to move out of his initial uncomfortability and to be comfortable learning new things was a big change for him. We've had people that have watched our DVDs that were law enforcement officers. I had one recently that was it's the first one I've ever gotten like this, actually. It was a law enforcement training officer in Switzerland. And he reached out and he said to me that he wanted to be able to find a way to teach this to law enforcement officers in Switzerland. And okay, that's great. But there's so many different people that are approaching this in so many different ways, and we're trying very hard to make sure that we give people the opportunity to come through it at their pace. And so it's designed to go a little bit at a time. You don't have to rush into it, and you don't have to feel that you're stressed out by watching parts of it. The other element, I think, for you and your wife sitting down, again, we have a sort of an environment now that we exist in. Whether you're watching the mainstream media or you're listening to talk radio or watching podcasts like yours and Reluctant Preppers, that we can collectively feel as a society something is coming. And we're not exactly sure what it is. I was listening to a discussion today on a radio program that said there are 5 elements that precede a civil war. And he proceeded to list off all 5 of these elements to include, government officials basically not doing their jobs, media that's deeply entrenched and divided. And he went through all 5 of these. And it was quite fascinating to sit there and listen to this and go, whoa, gee, yeah, we're in every single one of those pieces. And you can tell in sort of the American collective gut that we're trying to figure out how to communicate with our neighbors. And that should go into consideration with how we engage our preparations, because being an island unto ourselves, if we, go into this catastrophic situation is going to be challenging. We've seen now in Houston as well as in Florida that if a natural disaster comes in, you're going to be relying on more than just yourself. And so how can we start to figure out how to communicate with each other again and get past this sort of collective gut check that we're having?
Yep. And just a couple of anecdotes, and some of our viewers have heard me mention this one before, and that is that about 4 years ago when we first started our channel, one of our first interviews, and it's been one of our extremely popular ones from our classic interviews, is an interview with a county sheriff. He is a county sheriff from the state of Ohio. He happens to be hold a national board position in the National Association of County Sheriffs and so on. So he really has been at it a long time, and he stressed a lot in his presentation about how he works for the people, not for the government, and how sheriffs are, for example, the constitutionally provided for law enforcement in the Constitution of the U.S. and so on. And that initial interview with him got 150 thumbs up and 0 thumbs down when we put it out 4 years ago. We republished it this year as a classic re-release for our newer subscribers, and it got very mixed reviews. Same content, but something has changed in the last 4 years, and the amount of conflicted messages from very high places, the White House, the mainstream press, etc., about conflict between people and police, people and law enforcement, different groups of people within the country. How much, in your experience of that, is reflective of intrinsic changes in the culture versus how much of it is a byproduct or manufactured effect that is actually being funded, being encouraged, being escalated or magnified by impressions or narratives that are being presented more often to us than others in either through media or other sources?
I think you've got kind of two things going on. I think one, people are becoming so entrenched, if you will. The words that have sort of been thinking in my head lately is the word that keeps coming to my mind is the word tribalism. We're like choosing our tribes. And so, if you were a big fan of the Vikings, you don't like the Green Bay Packers. And we're now starting to do this with politics. We're doing it with the news, and we're starting to do it with other people that sort of exist in our lives. We see this in the firearms in the training world, right? If you're a Glock shooter, you hate SIGs. And if you're a 1911 person, well, Glock people don't know what they're talking about. And it's a fairly interesting sort of how entrenched people have become. That's sort of what I think is going on. I think the narratives that we're seeing, whether it's from the news media or other areas, is I think they're feeding off of the tribalism, that it allows them to achieve ratings, and it allows them to sort of keep their group as close to them as possible. One of the things that, we've tried to work really, really hard at, with SEAL mindset training is, we're as, if you will, the word I use is libertarian. We're as independently minded as possible. We go wherever the evidence leads us. And so if there's a technique out there better than what we're doing, explain to me why. Let's empirically prove that you're correct. And if that's the case, okay, good, let's do that instead. And so we've got no ego about that. And that allows us to service a lot of different people from a lot of different perspectives. The one class, though, that we're finding where we have, I won't use the word conflict, but you can tell there's a tension more than what there was 4 or 5 years ago. And that's in permit to carry classes. People are very concerned about their relationship with law enforcement, their relationship to the law and government. And I think, we'd spent a fair amount of our time as preppers and gun people not paying attention to what our rights were and what a statute was versus, what the case law is. And those things are very important for us to understand. And a lot of training outfits and things like that are kind of doing their people a big disservice by not helping them, their clientele, understand how their rights with having that firearm interlock with their responsibilities as being a member or a citizen of the society. And so we're starting to see this tension, of groups coming in. And again, that starts to be true when you start to describe, well, how do you engage with law enforcement? And so we go through a very detailed process of how do you call 911 as an example, and then how do you connect with law enforcement when they show up if you had to defend yourself. And people are, again, very sort of tribally splitting themselves. The police are bad, the police are good. And SEAL mindset says, well, the vast majority of police officers are just like you. They are working very hard to try and do their jobs, and they work in a really hard and sometimes really crappy job. And they don't know you from Adam. And so if you understand the system that's been developed, the system that you would call an adversarial system, and I don't mean that because we're fighting against them. It's just, they're trying to prove that you did X and you're trying to prove that you didn't. And by understanding all of those pieces and how they fit together, you start to see those entrenched sort of tribal positions start to come out. And that's a really interesting, that's been a really interesting dynamic.
One thing that I think we've experienced and seen and heard from others that's fueling some of that anxiety that you're describing is in an increasingly complex world, the individual, we actually had one of our interviewees on a few months ago talking about you are now obsolete, and went through category after category after category, from worker to investor to parent to whatever, where the ordinary individual, the normal human person with ordinary intelligence and abilities and skills and common sense and reason and natural rights and that sort of thing, more and more is being disenfranchised, a voter, etc., to where the experience, the takeaway that people have, their real gut experience, whether it's the tax code or whether it's the health care, paying more and more to receive less and less until it's all their money is gone. The thing's getting so complex, so Byzantine, so interconnected and out of their direct control. I mean, even in our money supply, right? It used to be the gold coin or the silver coin you could hold in your hand or have in your pocket and hand down to the next generation. And it would be unchanged and you owned it, no question. And now it's like, no, it's a paper dollar bill that said you could exchange it for a gold coin. Then after that, no, it's a paper dollar bill that said you couldn't exchange it for gold. Pretty soon it was, you can't even have the paper dollar bill anymore. No, sorry, now you got to just have the digital chip card, and on and on. It's getting farther and farther removed from the individual to where people really feel that they're being made powerless by a system. Being made powerless in an area where you feel your vital interests are at stake is inherently stressful. So for people, that makes perfect sense to me, that then when we're having a course, like a concealed carry course, where you're talking about the right to wield potentially lethal force in order to protect your life and health, is necessarily starts to be pretty stressful for people, not just because that subject of itself is intrinsically a vital subject, but because there's fear that if I don't do it just right, I'll be the victim no matter what. I'll be the victim if I do act, I'll be the victim if I don't act, and oh, by the way, the rules are so complex about how I can act that it's impossible for me. And so we just kind of, as in every other area of life, people tend to start abdicating. I guess I'll just go watch the comedy, because right. I'm just going to give up.
I'll disconnect. Yeah, I'll disconnect.
Right.
And I think that's very, very true happening in the self-defense world as well. Technology is changing at a rapid clip. I mean, when I started doing training, your handguns across the board were very, very similar. Nobody was applying. If you went to buy a flashlight on your firearm, it dang near looked like your old mag light that you used to keep in a junk drawer. And now I can get 1,000 lumen light from Surefire that I can put in the bottom of a handgun. 1,000 lumens that'll fit on a handgun. That's just amazing. And laser beam sights and all kinds of stuff that you can throw on this thing to improve your ability to be able to run this. And at the same time, we're now seeing technology moving into the law enforcement realm that we hadn't seen before. And we're seeing people carrying around technology that we wouldn't have had 10 years ago. One of the things in the class that people, get really stunned about, which kind of surprises me, is when I start to talk about their cell phones. And I go, you are carrying around literally the greatest intel tracking device in the history of mankind. And you're doing it for free. You are giving everybody this information at all times. And every location, everyone that you've called, every email that you've sent, every picture that you've taken, anything that exists in digital form is out there, and people can go out there and get it. And for example, if you go and defend yourself with a cursory scan of your phone, they know everywhere that you've been, they know everyone that you've talked to, they know every photograph that you've taken, and the law enforcement so that can retrace your steps on that cell phone to connect together with what happened in that defensive situation. They know where you are. The word that came from author Brad Thor was, it's no longer a digital footprint. What you have is a digital shadow. They know where you are in relation to the sun shining. And I was chatting with a law enforcement officer recently talking about how they can go through crime scenes, and they have the ability now to go to a crime scene, and they can set up it looks like a cylinder-looking device on top of a tripod. And the cylinder-looking device will do a 360-degree photo scan of the area, and they can literally create a three-dimensional model of the space that they can use to analyze every direction a shot fired, every direction a casing flew, every footstep. I mean, the whole 9 yards. It's incredible. And I think people are feeling this element of stress, to wondering whether or not what they would do to defend themselves, is it going to get them away from this, behemoth of a government, right? Is not, I don't mean get away with it. What I mean is that if I go and act and defend myself, and they use all of this stuff, is there anything that I can do to make sure that I'm protected? And the great answer is no. You can do a lot of things to give yourself the best possible chance, but there really isn't a guarantee. The gentleman that I worked with in developing the legal aspects of SEAL mindset training was one of the guys that was one of the co-authors of the Minnesota Permit to Carry law. And he always had two statements whenever we were talking about an issue relating to the law. And the first one was, there are 12 opinions in a courtroom that matter, and yours isn't one of them. And the other one that he always said was, if you're talking about something and there's nothing, even if you think there's something definitive about it, you should always end the conversation with, and the jury will decide. And that's sort of the position that we're in, is that we as defenders need to work and train and develop our skills such that if we have to go to defend ourselves, we, if possible, could first avoid the conflict. If we can't avoid the conflict, can we deter the threat? And if we can't deter the threat, did the actions that we take meet what I call the foundational legal perspective of defense? That foundational legal perspective works wherever you happen to be. So forgive me as I run through this, but in order to be seen as, in order to be not prosecuted or convicted, you need to be seen by a prosecutor or a jury as someone who is an unwilling participant, absent of any aggression or provocation, that the force that you used was necessary and that no lesser force would do, that you had no way to retreat safely, that you're in immediate fear of great bodily harm or death, and the great bodily harm or death of another, and that you were reasonable in the grounds for your fear. And when you look at that and think about how most people are taught about self-defense, right? They're not approaching it from, look, this is how the jury is going to be looking at you. This is how the prosecutor is going to be looking at you. And you have to recognize your role as a citizen defender, defending yourself in a lethal force encounter, that your job is to do everything in such a way that the case that the officer hands the prosecutor is one he can't win. Or in fact, that he looks at it and goes, oh, that's pretty clear. And he just says, yep, we're not prosecuting, we're not charging anything. And that really is the defender's job so far as we exist in sort of a legalistic society.
You talked about, in our pre-discussion, about the anxiety level of our society. We've just now covered a lot of reasons people might be feeling anxiety, but what do you know about the research into anxiety of our society?
I was listening to a discussion today, I was listening to it, and according to social scientists and psychiatrists and stuff like that, that we are now living in the most anxiety-ridden society ever since the measurement of anxiety has been taken, and we're living in it now. And you can kind of see how that would happen. I mean, you mentioned that, we have people that we don't understand what's happening necessarily with the government. We have our entrenched political differences. We are feeling very overwhelmed by what particular elements of government could do to us if we happen to get on the wrong side of it. You talk about things becoming and people becoming obsolete, right? We are we're in a society right now where we're in a new space race, but the new space race isn't who can get to the moon. The new space race is who develops AI first and who develops it better. And we're having as much change now as we did in the Industrial Revolution. And I think in the next anywhere from 10 to 20 years, we could experience an entirely different way of life. I mean, you have people out in Silicon Valley now discussing whether or not we as individuals should be getting an income here. Just because you exist, here's money. Because they're starting to wonder, okay, well, if we get all these robots running and we get all this AI running, what do we do with all the people that don't have anything to do? And that's a pretty serious problem, and we probably should be having a broader discussion on it. And I think that, we as citizens have sort of, as you mentioned, we sort of abdicated it for other people to discuss it for us. And we've done that with our own personal security. We've done it for a lot of people in our own preparations for disasters. We've just sort of abdicated that somebody else will get it done when it happens. And that's a very odd position, I think, for us as Americans to be in. We haven't really done that before. Your grandparents would have had, canned food in the basement. I mean, you would have had, ways of being able to, clear trees and debris. And now we've got people that live in, apartments in mega cities that don't have enough food for a day, much less, you won't have power for the next 3 weeks in Florida. And it's a very, very tenuous position that we are growing as a society.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture, but I think it's a honest one about unprecedented levels of intrusion, overreach, loss of autonomy, loss of privacy, that sort of thing. In the face of all of that and the psychological stresses that come with it, this is the signs of the changing times. There's only a certain amount that people can do about that. There's only a certain amount they can influence about that. This is the signs of the times we live in. But in the signs of all that change, what are some unchanging principles about mindset and self-management and self-control and self-leadership, about the things you really have direct influence over and direct control over that you teach at Sealed Mindset?
One of the big ones is that your effort and your work matters. That they're always going to when we had the Industrial Revolution and a lot of the people were starting to lose work because of the machines, it wasn't that work went away. It's just that work changed. And one of the big unchanging principles at Sealed Mindset is, the idea of no ego. We don't do skills in a certain way because that's just the way we do it. We do it because that's the best evidence for how to work this particular skill. And if we find one that's better, we'll do that instead. And being able to be open to reinventing your defensive technique because you have a better tool, or being able to be open to changing how your awareness works based upon how new technology is there. So as an example, one of the examples that we use for identifying a potential threat is someone who's either distracted or faking a task. And what I mean by that is, if you hold a cell phone, you see somebody working on a cell phone, I like to call that the zombie box. Because the moment that somebody goes and becomes engaged in something into the cell phone, the rest of the world doesn't exist. And if you notice somebody that seems to be sort of half engaged to the cell phone, they're not really engaged. And so the question you have to start asking yourself is, what are they really engaged in? And this allows to have a very fast ability to establish awareness of what other people are doing. Those abilities to go through and find people that are distracted or faking a task is an unchanging principle, because that's just simply human nature. The other element of it, too, is that we as human beings have an ability to both be people that can be helpful and connected to other people and provide them aid, or people can be monsters. And you as a defender have to realize that for the most part in your life, you are somebody that's there to be helpful. You're providing aid to other people. You're trying to find ways to work with them. And most people don't think that there's ever a possibility by which, gee, I don't know if I could actually go and cause this person harm to defend myself. And the reality is, yes, you can. And you need to be able to learn how to turn that characteristic on and turn it off. We like to say it is you achieve a state of what we call justifiable sociopathy. What that means is at the moment that you're having to defend yourself, can you, for the next 30 to 60 seconds, care nothing for the person that's standing in front of you? But then you need to shut that back off. And so being able to step into this, the darkness, and then turn it back off and step back into the light is a really important thing. That's something that human beings have been working on since human beings have been here, and it'll be something that human beings are going to work on until we're not here. And
that you just made me think about in movies about vicious wars and that kind of thing. When you see that those who immediately are retrieving even wounded enemy from the battlefield and treating their wounds and that sort of thing, because at that point they're no longer a threat. And how that can it seems to make, on the one sense, if you just think black and white, it makes absolutely no sense to be kind to your enemy if you were just shooting at them a minute ago, and now you successfully took them down, and now you're going to start caring for their wounds, or burying the dead, that sort of thing. But from it makes real sense at a deeper level.
I mean, we did it, when we were in the Civil War. We did it during World War II, World War I. Americans have done that all over the place. Humans have done that. Think about every boxing match or MMA fight you've ever seen. These guys step into the ring hoping to cave the other guy's skull in. And as soon as the fight is over, they're walking over. Hey, good fight. That was super nice. I really enjoyed, maybe it wasn't nice, but they enjoyed it, right? And this camaraderie of experience, goes through. There's a tremendous documentary on World War II that was back in the 70s. And the documentary was so wonderful because it featured people that had been in there, right? So when they were talking about like the Wolfpack attack system designed by the German Navy, they actually had Karl Dönitz right there to explain how it worked. It's like, that's amazing. Well, at one point they were talking with different pilots who were having the fight, or the British pilots having the fight over the Battle of Britain. So here you have two different guys in these machines, both of them trying to blow the other guy out of the sky. And yet when it would happen where a plane would get knocked out and one pilot would jump out of the plane and try to parachute to the ground, inevitably a pilot might get caught up on the wing. Their parachute would get caught up on the wing of another plane. And the British guys we were always so careful, just slide them off, make sure they get off. Didn't have to do that, but now they're not a threat to them anymore, and they're literally trying to figure out, how can I get these guys safely to the ground? And that's a very, very important aspect of human nature that I really hope that we can develop more. We try to do that, with the training aspect, in that you have your scenario side of it where you have somebody trying to come and attack you, and they're coming with as realistic a firearms as we can make. So you're shooting full sim rounds, it goes bang, and there's a projectile, and if you get tagged, it hurts. But when it's all over, right, the person with the mask comes off, and now you're working together trying to go, okay, what happened in that scenario? How well did that go for you? What things did we miss? What things didn't we miss? And how can we help make each other better?
And any other unchanging principles because Field Mindset talks not only and teaches not only immediate self-defense and preparedness, but also leadership. What is the connection there?
The big element with leadership is it's trying to think of it in a new way. So many times we as people stepping into realms of leadership and stuff is we actually go in and manage versus lead. And what's really important to learn about leadership is two different things. Number one is that you're not always leading. In fact, the best definition that we would use is what we would call a lead follower. What that means is if, let's say, I'm your boss, and I walk up and I say, hey, Dunnigan, how about where should we go to lunch today? And you say, golly, we should go to Chili's. And I'd go, great, you just led us to Chili's. I didn't make that call, you did. And so we're trading off who's actually leading with people that we interact with all the time. The difference between then, if you will, a leader and a manager is purely positional authority. But people can be leaders even if they don't necessarily have positional authority. They can influence and make change. The other element of it is so many times what we have is a leadership structure, a system whereby we feel that if we are not always leading, not always in command, then our worth is diminished. That somehow if somebody else becomes more successful or they can lead or they can do something that's good, that somehow our sphere is collapsed. And that's a really dangerous way to think, because that leads people to sabotaging other people and things like that. We can see it in certain types of training environments. You know, a guy getting ready, you know, that wants to go and fight MMA, right? He might go and, you know, beat up on his training partners because he doesn't want them to take the slot versus, you know, him getting that slot. And we in the, you know, on the training element, we go and, okay, no. Every other person in this room can help you and teach you how to do this better. So if you have to survive in a, you know, critical incident, you can do so. And so to change the idea that because someone else can help you or help lead this particular situation, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have less worth or that somehow you've lost power. It really isn't the case. And so to get that sort of a shift in a work environment or even within your family and your friends can make a really big difference.
That also builds and strengthens trust in relationships, and relationships are a big part of how we stay safe as humans in the face of an unpredictable future. Always has been.
Absolutely.
Beau, our time is out, but if you could let people know what's new on your resources that you provide and where they can find out more.
Oh, yeah. So we're putting out a lot of content. We do a weekly training newsletter every single week, and that's always got some information about how you can work or develop or train to improve your ability to defend yourself. We also produce a drill of the week video, which is designed for you to be able to go out and go to your local range and practice some skills. And those, if you request it, you can go and actually request PDF downloads of that drill. So it shows you how to set it up, how do you conduct the drill, and then you can take that right to the range for a way to practice. And all of that can be found at the new website, which is sealedmindsettraining.com. And we're putting out material all the time. We've got new videos and stuff, and we're out there trying to help as many people as we can.
And for those who don't live close enough to make it in person to your tactical training, you've got resources that they can purchase as well and take that into their home and get your training in person there. Yes.
Yep. So the Concealed Carry Master's course is all on using a handgun for personal security. And that it works for people that are, you know, pretty new to shooting a handgun all the way to people that have been shooting for years. We have an entire series on defending the home, and that's called Home Defense Rifle. So how to set the house up for defense and then to use the rifle as the primary defensive tool in the house. We have a video on situational awareness, and that's called Avoid, Deter, Defend. And what we do there is we actually translated the same kinds of material they would teach special operations guys to avoid enemies in the field, and we translated it to the citizen world. And that's a great one. Also teach how to use the defensive flashlight. So if you have a tactical flashlight, how to use that as a tool. And then the last video is called Real World Safety, and that's a great video that covers a lot of the same material in Avoid, Deter, Defend, but it's specifically designed for a younger audience. So say your middle school to high school or through college is what that video is designed to help.
Well, we've been speaking with Beau Doboszenski, the Director of Training at Sealed Mindset Training, which was founded by retired Navy SEAL Lieutenant Larry Yatch. He's been here with us again here on Reluctant Preppers to talk to us about what we can do in the face of overwhelming change in our society that seems to take away the power of individuals, but you do not need to have your power taken away because there's so much left that we can still do. Beau, thank you always for being with us here again on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you again for having me.